Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Zwift Racing League. I'm Dave Towle, joined by Kate Bates in Australia, where it is already Wednesday, middle of the day, Wednesday, but we're wrapping up day one of community racing here. And Kate, we have a lot to talk about. We'll jump right in. People probably wondering where Nathan is, and he's fine. He's doing the producing. He's already announced something like 8 hours of racing today. It's been a monster day out there, Kate. Absolutely insane. So the Zwift Racing League, if you're just joining us, is a brand new racing league that has a premier league that raced yesterday. Today, we're into the community racing. And, Kate, it's open to everybody.
It is. I mean, I think that Nathan's been so busy because there's so much interest globally, and not only amongst the season races, but those that are fairly new to the digital community. And Dave, everybody talks about the nasty stuff that 2020 has served up, but I think that this Zwift Racing League is a very big positive, and it's a lot of opportunities for people to dip their toe in the water. And quite honestly, I think we might be seeing some stars of the future who might just be trying it out for now, but you never know, sky's the limit.
Yeah, for our American audience here, Kate, I just want people to understand that you are one of the legends in the sport coming from Australia. So, from my perspective, it's a real honor to be able to get to work with you today and learn a lot about the racing. We have 946 men's teams, almost 200 women's teams. We're going to jump in with the women first, but let's talk about some of the details here because Zwift and WTRL, that's the World Tactical Racing League. This is a collaboration that started yesterday. Actually, it started many months ago as they started building. The anticipation has been just out of this world. And now here we are with the community racing today. It's a global league structure with 10 weeks of racing. And here we are in week one, 250 Zwift events making up what's going to be that 10 race season, the premier division and the 6 different leagues. So with 60 different divisions, 1,142 teams of between 3 and 6 racers. But Anna, it is worth noting for the team time trial, and each week we're going to alternate back and forth between scratch racing, like we have today, or team time trial racing, which I'll be interested to hear if you've ever done any in real life team time trials. But the WTRL, they really defined that category of racing. That discipline has been so much fun, and you're going to need at least 4 riders, and you're really going to want to have 6. So that kind of lays down some of the groundwork for us. We will be talking about all of the different racers, and we have 8 different races going on in our community. This is America's West. We just wrapped up America's East. But Anna, let me throw it to you because I don't know if you've ever had a chance to race on this course before, but throughout the day today, it has been a brute. It has really blown up our fields.
I haven't raced on the course, but I've certainly ridden the course a lot. And I think it's a day for the punchy climbers. We are going through to December with this series. Every alternate week, as you said, will be a team's time trial. We can unpack the difficulty of that next week. But for today, it's not one necessarily for the climbers. The climbs are reasonably short, but it's also not one for the sprinters. And I know that for me, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the volcano, especially in the Watopia climb. And I think a lot of the riders will too. And I think a lot of the strategy today, Dave, will be just survive. So there'll be some teams trying to play the aggressor and trying to make the move. But equally, I think there'll be a lot of riders a bit hesitant, a bit new to it all, wondering, what do I do today? And just trying to hang in. So it will be interesting to see that dynamic.
Kate, when you look at it, I completely agree because that is what we've seen today is when you talk about survive, I don't think we've really seen one breakaway go clear. It's just riders getting shown the back door over and over again until ultimately you end up with a really elite group that goes into the final 600 meters where the race has been decided out there today. But 100% agree with your assessment about this course today. And Nathan and I have said a few times, the racers make the race. I'm sure from your perspective, you'd agree with that. And the course, though, certainly it serves up a lot for them to work with today. I'll let you take us through it, Kate.
Well, it's 50 kilometres and they've got some KOMs out there. They go through Titans Grove, which is about 2.5K climb, up Watopia Hill. It's less than a kilometre, but that's a pretty nasty one. Over the volcano, and that's nearly 4 kilometres. That's also really going to test the abilities because the legs will be a bit fatigued. And then they go back through the reverse of Titans Grove for the finish. Dave, there's a lot of challenging moments out there. I think the flat in the middle will certainly be a moment to regroup for the riders. And 50 kilometres, 4 KOMs, the longest of which is the volcano, which averages out at about 3%. So look, that's not too tough, but there is a few differences from real world racing versus Zwift. And one of those big differences is that elastic band effect. That is real. You do not want to lose a wheel at all. And the moment that 2 meters, 3 meter, 4 meter sign pops up, get back on the wheel. That is the absolute moment. And, it's almost more truthful in that regard because in real life, you don't have that popping up and reminding you. And you can almost walk away from the race and say, I kind of stuffed it up. I misread it. You can't here. You've got absolutely no excuse. If you miss the move, it will literally tell you on the screen. I mean, in that regard, Dave, I think a little bit of mental toughness will play into this round as well.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you talk about in real life racing and esports racing. I think sometimes esports racing can be a little more real than people could ever imagine. And that feeling of getting dropped and trying to rejoin a group is unlike any. We've saw it happen quite a bit out there today in some of our different time zones. So again, there's a lot to wrap your mind around with racing today, Kate. We've had all of the different races that have happened, but now here we are, the America's West, and the men and the women are ready to throw down. You mentioned it's 50 kilometers, 3 major climbs. Let's talk quickly about the point structure. So there's really 2 ways that you can do a bike race. You can either have it be based on time or have it based on points. And I think the element of points that we have here in the team format is really interesting. This is unlike anything I've ever seen at an in real life race. So really quickly, we have 3 QOMs or KOMs along the way. Those are scoring 5 deep. 5 points for the first rider over the line, 4, 3, 2, and 1 for the fifth. Now, that then just sort of, it's an appetizer for the main course, which is the finish where 30 points are awarded to the winner. But then, Kate, we take all of these points and for each team, add them together, and then the final result will be our team result today. 20 points for the first team. This is the first of 10 races that we'll do out here. So I think that sets the table. Are you ready to go to work here? We should have some great racing already going on with the women.
Look, I think we can get down to the racing. And strategically, Dave, I think, some of the teams will be going with some riders for those KOM points and then also with some kind of different style riders going for that final sprint. And team selection will come into this a lot. But again, I think for this first race, we might have a few cautious bodies and cautious legs, just feeling it out and wondering what's ahead. We've certainly got some riders. I think if we look at their 20-minute peak powers, that they will be the riders that will fare the best today, and riders with a good 20-minute peak power and then also a good kick at the end are probably the ones who, if they play their cards right, are more suited to this kind of course.
I'm really excited to have you on board because that kind of data is going to we're going to learn a lot out there today. There's no question. So as we jump in here with the A women, they're out on course first. You can see that they've already completed the first, let's say, 6.5K, and the ATP team is already in full effect here. And so this team format has made things much more interesting out here. It's not a bunch. So, Kate, when we really started with Zwift racing, if you go back 4 years ago, it was individuals showing up and the first team units were starting to form. And I mean, for someone who doesn't follow pro cycling, I don't think that they would understand how this is a team sport that has individual glory, unlike any other sport that I can really think of. Is there anything that would come to mind to you that would be similar to the landscape that pro cycling offers?
Absolutely not. But in saying that, having having watched the Michael Jordan documentary, I think that in many ways he kind of got the glory from the team's victory. But absolutely, it's very unique. And I saw a situation just last week where one of the riders we'll call it in real life versus esports, was changing his shoe mid-race. And I commented at the time that there's no other sport in the world where someone would have to continue competing while trying to change a shoe. In any other sport, they would certainly come off the field, change their shoe and run back on. And I think cycling, whether it is esport or any other version, is absolutely unique. And Dave, I'd also say that the team is a huge dynamic, but it's that little bit harder in the esport world. And these riders really need to be commended for how savvy they are, because the reactions are very different. I think a lot of our riders will be using Discord, which is where they can communicate via video and voice during the race. So that's a tool that they can use to link up between the team. But I also think it's fair to say that they will really have a strategy coming into today. And that might really help them, not get too nervous, not make the wrong move, but just execute that team strategy. And at the end of the day, if it didn't play out as they wanted, then certainly it will become more autonomous in the next 9 weeks.
There's a steep learning curve, Kate, no doubt about it. And that's one of the things that I love, is that there are a lot of riders that are jumping into the deep end, joining these teams for the first time. As we mentioned, there's, in the neighborhood of 1,200 teams that have come together, and a lot of them are relatively new. So there's going to be that feeling out process, learning the strengths and weaknesses of your team. And as you mentioned, Discord is a real blessing for these riders, that ability to communicate. I suppose there's multiple ways to do it, but we really have used Discord. I'm going to imagine the Australians and New Zealanders use Discord just as much as we do. It really works well for the task at hand. So as we take a look at this group now, a lot of riders hanging in there. But I tell you what, Kate, the thing that we've seen today is this first QOM does a lot of damage. As a matter of fact, I'm going to anticipate here. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, Dave, I mean, this course really lends itself to lean on those QOMs, doesn't it? The in-between is perhaps a bit of a recovery and to regroup, but these KOMs really have the ability to completely split the bunch apart.
They do. And so one of the things that you were talking about to start the show, and it's an interesting concept, is using riders as role players out here, right? So maybe riders that would target the first couple QOMs and then let their teammates take over. But one of the things that we've seen today, I would use Ed Laverick, one of the men's riders, as an example, is if you're good, you're good. And it seems like the cream rises to the top in esports racing to me quite quickly out here. And this selection that's made can be pretty definitive. It's not going to decide the race for the winner, but it's certainly going to decide a lot of riders that aren't going to win today, Kate.
And that's a great one, actually. If you're good, you're good. And I think that concept kind of favors the sprinters a tiny bit more, because a good sprinter in form will be able to suffer over the KOM. And the term I would use is snivel a few points if they need to, but it is far more heavily stacked at the finish for the points. And so if a sprinter is good and can get over that KOM just holding some wheels and maybe getting a few points, then they are in absolute plum position. It's a bit tougher for the climbers because it isn't necessarily the kind of course that lends to solo breakaways. And so they may be able to open a gap and take those points over the top of the climb. But even if they were to stay away, Dave, because it is points, if a sprinter was to come second, the climber has then used an awful lot of energy to get a small advantage. So that's the kind of strategy they really need to think of today. So if they can get the climbers within their team to attack over those climbs or really lead from the front and take those points, and then get them to then lead out their sprinters at the finish, I think that could be a way to accrue the most points. And again, I really think there'll be a lot of regrouping after today, going back to the drawing board and saying, what did we do right? How can we do it better? And what is the point skew that will get us on top?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Kate, when you look at it, because that insight is really valuable. Because the thing that's different here is with a points-based formula, it isn't so important that you get the win. What's really more important, almost riding for Team GC in a Grand Tour, is consistently putting 3 or 4 riders into that final 10 to 12 rider selection. That's where you gobble up the points that you need. So we've seen some teams really going for these intermediate sprints, the bonus points here that we'll call our QOMs today. And I mean, if you do a really good job and can put a few riders up into the top 10, you can clear 20 to 30 points out here. But that's a massive effort. And then you have to look at the big payoff for the finale. And again, if that is a 10 rider group going to the line and you've got 4 riders in that group, you're going to be in really good shape. Remembering that this is a 20 team league here. So each team basically use an average of, I would say, 5 riders per taking the start here. So you start running those numbers and you realize it's all about just keeping a decent number of riders in the front group. I mean, look at this ATP team out here. They're doing a fantastic job. The team in black with the green and red chevrons there. They've been one of the teams that's been making the race. Let's talk about that, Kate. How much resources do you put into this point in the race?
Well, it is still fairly on. So 50 kilometres of racing, they're 11.1 kilometres in, but they are ticking slightly uphill. And interesting to note that the speed has remained fairly high. So it's stayed over 30 kilometres an hour, even up to this 5% that hill clipped up to. At this stage, the teams don't need to be doing anything more than what I like to say is don't let someone leave the island. So if somebody attacks, you absolutely need to put a couple of riders up there and make sure it doesn't get off. We don't want anybody sailing off in a cruise boat. But at the same time, there isn't a lot of point in really forcing the brake because through here and through these rolling little hills, the pace is pretty high anyway naturally. They need to make sure they don't waste too much energy, Dave.
Kate, this is exactly what we were talking about. This isn't a breakaway. This is them punching tickets out here. And that's going to be the story of the day. So, Kate, I want to go back to a point you were making earlier that I thought was absolutely brilliant. And by the way, I want to put in an offer to buy the American rights to all of your cool catchphrases because I want to get a hold of them before Nathan does. Because I love that leave the island. Yeah. The leave the island is something we've never said before, and I love it. It makes a lot of sense. And these 6 are leaving the island right now. But going to the wrong island. Or maybe they fight back. You talked about how hard this is to do. But I want to go back and make that point that even though if you look at the parcours on paper here, the course profile, it's a lot of climbing, but it's nowhere near enough climbing for a pure climber to be able to do anything with it. And the strong all-arounders that have a bit of a sprint, as Kate was talking about earlier, well, when they're climbing well, they're sprinting really well. That is one of the real indicators that you learn. I think, Kate, that would be a truism, right, in the pro peloton. When you see a sprinter, obviously Mark Cavendish has been in the news. When he was sprinting his best, he was climbing in some pretty elite groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you can approach a climb if you're a sprinter is to start at the front and drift to the back. So for any of these riders who are a bit worried about their climbing abilities, it definitely makes a lot more sense to put a bit of effort in at the bottom, get a good position in the bunch, and then as it gets a little bit tough, they can afford to back off the gas just for 1 or 2 pedal strokes, and that 1 or 2 pedal strokes can make a massive difference. And there's 2 types of climbers generally, Dave. There's the riders who can just go all day at a very consistent and very high power, and they're our Tour de France winners really. And then there's the riders who are more dynamic, and they tend to be more of the sprint kind of riders, and they can accelerate and need a break, accelerate and need a break. Now, if somebody at the front of the bunch is not allowing you to ride the climb in the way you would prefer, you can stack it a bit by going to the front, giving yourself a slight break, dropping back, going to the front and yo-yoing a bit within your own abilities. That does take a bit of experience though. And so I think a lot of these riders will still be discovering how to do that in an esport world, where you've got this mental overload and these pictures are popping up in front of you. And I think that that's a really important thing to talk about, Dave, is the mental capacity needed, the mental energy to do esports racing, because there's a lot more input than there is on the road. A lot of the riders in the pro peloton, Mark Cavendish definitely included, will put black tape over their SRMs or their power meters to make sure that they can't see the numbers because they just don't want all that input. But it's not possible to do it in this regard. And so I think riders need to come to peace with that a bit.
No brain, no pain is sort of the so we laugh about that, but there's something to it. And so do you call that sag climbing? What you've been talking about here, where if you aren't super confident, exactly what Kate was talking about, try to get to the front so that as you work your way back, you're still in contact with the group or close enough. But Kate, the other point you make that's so true is you take your eye off the prize for a second in Zwift racing, you find yourself with that really scary 10-meter gap. And then even top riders have a hard time closing that down on a motivated group of 10 riders or more. It is really hard to rejoin. It's that's sort of one of the very unique things about esports racing is you can't get distracted. You'll see riders having almost a squire with them, like that knight and squire concept where you have someone there if you need another bottle or to wipe your brow. We saw some riders doing that yesterday in the premier race. So having a little bit of help can go a long way. But Nate, right now, when you look at this group here, they are going to take this down to 20 riders, I would say. Boy, Kate, this is a really aggressive race. This is the way it's played out all day today. And again, remembering that we have all of our community races going on today. This is America West. We're getting right down to it here as we've got a few QOMs to score, some KOMs for the men as well, as they're probably just getting out on course. But this is a great time, Kate, to stay with the women, as it's going to be interesting to see who's going to put some points up on the board here.
This is a very interesting time in the race. And you say it's whittled down to about 20. For the riders not in that 20, that is bad news because there's almost no chance of them rejoining now. But I must say that's certainly true in Zwift more than in any other scenario. A group of 20 is a lot more comfortable than a group of 100 because that elastic band effect is amplified in game. And if you don't hold onto a wheel, boy, oh boy, does it become incredibly difficult to get back in that slipstream. Having 20 riders, it allows you to avoid that elastic band effect to a degree. And there'll be a lot of teams who their strategy is to go out early, force the pace until it is about this size, and then they're able to sit back and take a little bit more comfort. But watching Ange McRae, I mean, she is a really good hope, the Aussie. She has just put out such solid work on Zwift. She's been on there for a long time, does a lot of racing, is very experienced in the strategy side. And we can see that because she's riding back to those wheels. A small gap opens up and she's not sitting back and letting it happen. She's kind of jumping through to make sure she's protected. And talking about, the favourites for today, I suppose, Ange McRae is certainly one of the riders that has an excellent 20-minute power. It's around the 4.4 kilo mark, watts per kilo, which is pretty damn impressive. And Dave, I've got to say that in post-retirement, I'd be happy with that. But she's also got a good sprint on her.
Let's take a look. So they would have just scored the first 5 riders, and McRae, who you were speaking of, is in that conversation. It looks like Rogers, the Canadian, is going to be taking top bonification there, Kate, and then Angela McRae, Salthouse, Conley, and Gillick. I'll see if I'm right. I think I'm close as we score at QOM number 1. So that will be Titans Grove. Next up is the forward climb, then the volcano climb, and then we finish today on Titans Grove reverse. But let's talk about what we're looking at right here. Kate, this is a jailbreak going on. That group of 20.
Yeah, I mean, Anna Rogers is certainly a lot punchier than a lot of the other riders. She's a little bit higher in the watts per kilo class. She certainly has a great 15, 20-second sprint on her. Considering they went into that QOM with a reasonable bunch and at a reasonable pace, it doesn't surprise me that she was able, when she accelerated, that didn't just cause her to win by a wheel, but that it led her to win by a number of lengths. What she really needs to be careful of, though, is not wasting any more energy than she needs to. You really only need to win points by, well, literally, Dave, a centimetre or a millimetre will do it. 10 metres when the group is going to come back, she could next week take a lot of confidence from how well she did in that QOM. And in fact, in these upcoming QOMs, she can think, all right, well, I'm clearly climbing well. I'm clearly sprinting well. This is an opportunity for me to win only by the amount that I need to, because we have an even smaller group now. It was about 20, but the front group is now down to about 10. That allows them to play a lot more with strategy rather than just brute force.
You start looking around and take some inventory, Kate. And you make a really good point there as well when you talk about well, the situation in the race really changes at this point now. This becomes much more of the only the strong are going to survive. There's not too much more that a teammate can do for you. As we're going to go back and forth now and watch the riders that are trying to chase back into the group. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that they were in the front group here. As let's reset very quickly for everybody. So I know we have a lot of folks joining us. It's great to be into the final region of Racing with America's West. This is the women that we're looking at. They're about a third of the way into a 50-kilometer, what's really going to be a slugfest out here today. We're following one of the Wadi Inc. riders here. I did want to note that previously, when you talk about experience, Kate, we watched Anna Russell from New Zealand really have use her head and her legs, but she made some really great decisions at the middle point of the race that ultimately helped set the table for one of her teammates to win. And set the table isn't a bad analogy because I really enjoy talking with you here about this. And we're going to get a chance to jump in and look at the first QOM, the preem result there now. So again, though, it's always about helping your opponents finish what's on their plate before you start in on yours. So Anna Rogers taking 5 points there. She was the first over the line. And there we go. Angela McRae we were talking about Angela of the Doom Kittens team, BRT Doom Kittens. They got multiple squads now for 4. Kat Salthouse of ATP Swarm, and ATP Swarm has been on fire out here with not only Kat Salthouse, but Joy Conley. So that can show you right there. 2 riders getting 5 points that equals what Anna Rogers picked up for the Revo scores. So there you get a good look. Again, we're back in with Anna Rogers. Definitely a rider to watch. One of the strong Canadians here. For all the riders coming from Australia, New Zealand, what time is it there? You said lunchtime. Is that right, Kate?
Yeah, it's just after lunchtime, so it's an excellent time for the Aussies. And I think that's what's so unique about this league is that it isn't just appropriate for one time zone. And I tell you what, I love seeing some Aussies stick it to the Canadians and the US riders, all due respect, Dave. But what's interesting there is that the mix of teams, because, we had 2 teams featured in that top 5 and then another. And it does all come down to team points and how many people are scoring team points. So it's a little bit different again in that regard. But certainly Ange McRae doing a great job. But the Canadians and Americans, they're certainly shining bright so far in the race. And Anna Rogers, she's got a very strong team at Revo and she's got pretty good legs today. She's already showed us that. So I think she might have a bit of a target on her back now every time she moves. And, that's something to consider too. You don't want to show your cards too early because when it comes to the second and third KOM, the riders will now know. They'll already know who's in form, who's likely to move when. And so it does pay to mix it up a little bit. You don't want to become one of those riders, Dave, that everybody says, oh, we know that she'll go at this point and we knew that that's when she would move, because that's not going to help you out at all.
Well, here's a rider you should be familiar with, Wesley Sulzberger, and also a colleague of ours, part of the Zwift team in many ways. Wesley, I actually remember from going back into the 2000s racing at the Tour of Ireland, and he was one of many Australians that's ventured overseas, like yourself, Kate. There's something really special about the Australians and New Zealanders who make it up into the Pro Tour or race at the world level because you're traveling so much. It's such a big commitment. And I think even in America, where we have our own unique challenges about trying to get into that level of racing, there's something very special. I take my cap off to all of our Australian and New Zealand friends. You guys do a great job. And Wesley Sulzberger, we're taking a look at the men now. So this is the men's A field that we're jumping in with. Do you know Wesley, Kate? Have you ever met him?
I do. I know Wes. He was a couple of years behind me in juniors. That's how long he was racing for. And of course, he rode a number of Grand Tours. He's a Tour de France rider. And I think that just goes to show what a big deal esports is, that in many regards, it creates a new opportunity for riders who may or may not have retired from professional racing, for family commitments, for whatever it may be. This kind of provides a revival. It's so exciting. And I think that the Zwift HQ team, they're pretty stacked, actually. They've got Kieran Lewis in there as well. And they've been performing exceptionally well at the Giant Crit Crushers series that was running in a good Australian time zone and in replacement of what is usually a big crit series in Australia. And so the Aussies are on good form at the moment. The difference, though, Dave, is that those races were around the 10-kilometre mark, and they did have to back up for 2 races a night, but it was much, much punchier. So 50 kilometres is certainly a bit of a difference, especially with some KOMs out there.
I wonder what time it is, Kate, in Ukraine. I believe I just saw the Ukraine flag there. It definitely, when you talk about the cross-pollination here, a few of the riders coming from down under, and I think it's fair to say, credit where credit is due, Kate, the Australians do a little more venturing out of their time zone and get out of their comfort zone and race with in the American zones than we really do see from Americans who are jumping up at race at 3:00 in the morning. So either way, this is going to be a fun group to race out of here as we take a look at the big group together. But again, just like we saw with the women, they've got their first KOM coming up. I am amazed to see that Zwift Power is awesome. And it's one of the tools that I use all the time. Kate, I'm sure you've got Zwift Power open where you are. And it with a record-setting day. The amount of data that was run through the Zwift Power machine actually shut down 3 separate servers in China, right? They started smoking and they just blew up, Kate, because it was insane, especially those European, Middle East, Africa time zones earlier in the day. The volume of races was just absolutely amazing. So we're going to stay with the guys here for a little while. As a matter of fact, we probably should just bring them right on up to that KOM, and we'll score our first ever points for the America West region. Again, this is one of 6 community regions. This is a nice opportunity for me to quickly sort of lay out some of the foundation for you here. As we talked about this being a points-based series, 10 different races. Each week we'll alternate back and forth between this style of racing, this finish, start and finish line scratch racing, we call it, versus the team time trial, which was, I'm going to ask Kate a little bit later about her experience with those events, because that team time trial is something that almost went away, became a dinosaur in the sport of cycling. The discipline of team time trial last was held at the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, Fabio Casaratelli's games. I believe it was an Australian that won the gold medal for the women there. And so ultimately, though, we have 4,000 riders that show up for WTRL, World Tactical Racing League, who are our partners. And we look at, obviously, some setup work being done for this KOM right now. And so that gives me another opportunity to talk about the points-based format here, as we just saw our women's QOM a little bit earlier. And I think we're going to take a look at the replay here. So this is Rogers, the Canadian rider that we're looking at. Actually, we're going back and looking at the live action. I apologize. This is live action for our women at 22.5 kilometers in the Revo Scores team. And this is interesting. 4 riders together. ATP was going to push and push and push until they got their way. And Connolly and Stahlkamp are the 2 riders here representing that team. Rogers from the Revo Scores, who did pick up that first QOM. And then her teammate, okay, this is a very interesting situation, as Revo Scores has more here as well, but this one is unraveling in front of our eyes as we take a look again at Rogers, who was the best over that last climb, and you can see there is really a scramble going. This is a big moment in the race for our women here, as they're just coming up on the middle point. But Kate, let's bring you back in as we're going to take a look at Rogers picking up yet again maximum bonification. Stahlkamp, Connolly, Moore, and I believe Salthouse is how we're going to score that. But wow, this racing has been super aggressive, and look at the damage being done out there, Kate.
Well, you said earlier, Dave, if you're good, you're good. And I think Anna Rogers is certainly proving that that is the case, because she has been on form today. And it doesn't look too dissimilar with what's going on in the men's. There's some moves at the front. Kieran Lewis, we talked about him earlier from Zwift HQ. He was on excellent form at the Crit Crushers series, and he looks to be taking some line honours in the early KOM there through to the men's. We also have discussed, Dave, that it's not necessarily the kind of course that lends itself to solo breakaways. So I think the riders do need to use a bit of strategy there to when they're trying to forge a smaller group that might be 10 or 20 riders, and certainly a lot easier to control versus trying to make a breakaway. And there is a big difference between that. We've also spoken about riders dropping off the back as opposed to riders going off the front.
Right.
And, it's often the case where we see a break go off the front and then riders rejoin from the back rather than actually chase the break back. But the composition of that front group might change quite considerably with riders bridging across. They do really need to stay very aware. But the riders know the course. There's absolutely zero excuse for anybody to be caught unawares because they've had ample time not only to ride these courses, which is a fabulous feature of the esports world, because you certainly can't say that for the Tour de France. No rider will have reconned every stage of that, but there's kind of no excuse not to recon these stages in the esports world. In fact, these are courses that many of the riders will have ridden dozens of times, so they should be quite familiar with it, and they do need to stay very vigilant.
I'm going to go ahead, Kate, and really underline what you said earlier about doing just enough work to make the selection, but not doing any extra work. That's really the name of the game out here. And as Kate said now, so you're not going to win this race with the solo breakaway today. I mean, I guess there's always going to be that outlier day. I mean, anything can happen in the sport of cycling. There's no doubt. But I think that common knowledge here tells us that, again, it's going to be just these selections happen. 3 riders get their ticket punched. I mean, you're never exactly sure when it's going to happen. And Kate, what's even more amazing about esports and racing on Zwift is it happens on the downhills, especially after you go over some of these KOM climbs and our QOM climbs as well. And I think we're going to get a look at Watopia Forward here and our women's QOM, because there's a lot of racing going on. And it was going to be Anna Rogers picking up her second top bonification there. So that's 2 for 2 for Anna Rogers of the Rebel Scores team. They're in a 4-rider break right now. ATP Swarm has Joy Connolly coming across the line for second, as again, that will be the second QOM, and that's going to be the group. It's down to 3, Kate. Let's pick up the action. This is the vanguard of the race. Rebel Scores has 1 rider here, but boy, she's a monster when you talk about Rogers, but then never really an ideal situation when you have 2 teammates in a 3-rider breakaway when you're not one of the teammates.
Yeah, that's never an ideal situation because essentially the other team can 1-2 you. And but that also, I will say, depends on the team having really good cohesion, because then both of the riders in the break have to accept that perhaps it will be the other rider that rides away and takes the victory. So we're assuming that the teams are that committed and dedicated to each other. I love seeing that personally. But interesting to see how it plays out. We've got Ange McRae and Gillick rejoining here. This is really showing very early. I mean, they're halfway through the race, exactly who the strong riders are. And I said strong Rogers are there because Anna Rogers has been such a dominant force so far. I would have actually picked her to be second, third, fourth around the KOMs, one of the stronger riders, but not standout, but definitely a standout in the sprint. So to see her featuring so early on, when you're good, you're good. And she is good today. I think she's got a target on her back. But when you're that good, Dave, it doesn't really matter if you've got a target on your back. They've got to still try and chase it.
Yeah, a la Peter Sagan, right? So let's take a look now at this group because Rogers benefits greatly from having her teammate rejoining. That was Ange McRae that Kate was just talking about. This dynamic is constantly changing out here, Kate. I loved your comment a moment ago about nothing is more beautiful than a teammate sacrificing for another. But I'm sure, like all of us in the sport of cycling, not everybody is really great at making that commitment. It is really hard to get everybody on the same page. But You've got to think right now, this is a really unique situation because let's talk tactics here. I like what we're seeing. This is going to be a bike racing clinic that we're going to be watching here. It's like a Machiavellian chess match on wheels here, and add in a little bit of a bar fight.
What a great description. And the other thing to throw in is that not everybody fares equally on gravel or off-road. So this is a moment where you need to really have increased watts per kilo. It isn't like climbing though. It's not in the same way that you need to feel that. They're actually going downhill here, but the gravel is slowing them down. I think at this point, they're all just riding together. And that is kind of the beauty, if you will, of a breakaway, is that at this point, there's nothing defining. They're not in the business end of the race just yet. They do have the ability to just work together. And of course, Revo Scores have 3 in that front break now. So they certainly have the numbers, but there's absolutely no question that Anna Rogers is the dominant of those. So if I was Ange McRae, I would just be sitting there, or Salthouse. Cat also needs to watch the wheels, and she needs to play their advantage against them and say, well, you've got the numbers. The onus is on you to keep the pace going and to keep the rest of the riders from rejoining. They are about 25 seconds back. So that is a pretty decent break, more so in the virtual world than in real life because you can't see them ahead. So, Dave, I know when I raced, sometimes on long flat roads, you could see a 25-second break ahead and you could see the cars in between, and that was enough to give you the impetus to chase, but all that gets taken away. But I want to pick up something you said earlier about anything can happen, because one of the things that anything can happen includes falls and mechanicals, and they're 2 things that happen really quite often in the real world racing. That gets eliminated here. I love that. How good is that? You don't have to worry about that, although having said that, my trainer's gone flat in the middle of a ride before, but as has my laptop, that's a whole other story. But for the most part, these riders, there's a lot more that they can rely on, and that goes for the women and for the men, and there's a lot less variables, and it does come down a lot more to horsepower and grunt, and that also is where strategy comes in.
Grunt, the Australian for grinta in Italy, I think. I am really loving this, Kate. So, hey, hear
what's the American word for grunt?
Grit, I think. I'm not sure. It's hard to translate that. Yeah. We'll work on it, though. So, hey, I hear a lot of requests coming in for people looking to see the men's B race. And I know as we start the climb here, I am intimately familiar with this climb, as these guys are about a little over a minute away from scoring again on our KOM. But we are going to be jumping in with the Bs. So hold on, everybody out there. We are well aware. And I am hearing, get this, Kate, we had 5,294 racers. Over 5,000 racers participated in the community races with ZRL. That is an unqualified success.
It is just unbelievable. And firstly, a massive thank you to everybody who has strapped their boots on today to get out there and race. The accessibility of this just absolutely blows my mind. For people, there'll be a lot of our racers out there who have worked a full-time job at the office today, and there's also a lot of people, a lot of the women and men who will be looking after kids around their Zwifting. I absolutely love that they can fit this in, and kudos for making this a priority. And I think that's why it is so far-reaching and why it has such a huge future, Dave, because there's just so fewer restrictions on accessibility to it all. I certainly know when I Zwift, that my 2 small humans, my 2 little girls, often watch the screen. They're very entertained by it, and but they need to work on their cheerleading. They most often say, "Mummy, your face is very red," or "Mummy, you're very sweaty." So I need to work on that a little bit. But yeah, I think it's very accessible to a lot of the riders.
Kate, I heard a story, and this is sort of, I'm not going to name any names, but we're at a point now where we actually have an American racer who is possibly going to be nominated for our world championship team, who has never really raced outside, right? I mean, she's done nothing but competed in this platform and has been exceptional. And it is a whole new landscape that we've got. And I highly recommend, as Kate said, that we embrace this. And well, over 5,000 people did today. And if you think about it, that'll mean that week in, week out, we're going to be looking at worldwide one of the largest competitive events that happens. And you start looking, you start adding the numbers up and piling it up. It's absolutely amazing. We pick up the Stampede rider, Bauman here. We're in with the men's bees, Kate. And boy, it looks rugged out there right now. Little gaps opening all over the place. More splits in this field than you see in Las Vegas divorce court, Kate.
That's a very good description there, Dave. I was actually going to say it looks a bit more civilized than the A grade men. It certainly looks like they are all keeping each other very honest. And those gaps, we've discussed how those gaps are so dangerous, and they'll have these little warnings flashing up on screen. And there's kind of nothing more demoralizing than seeing the 2 meter, 3 meter, 4 meter jump back on, hold the wheel when you are absolutely at full gas. And it's a good indicator on the right-hand side where you can see the watts per kilo of the riders. And when you see over 6 watts per kilo, you know that is, well, that's a huge effort. And, Peter Sagan, who won the Giro stage overnight, he averaged just over 7 watts per kilo for a couple of minutes as his peak power during, and some of these athletes are certainly nearing that. So I think a lot of them, not only will these B grade riders be getting the grunt to move up to the A grade, but I think we will see a lot of them also able to race in the real world. I guess the missing link there is just skilling up, but that's possibly one of the easier ones, because if you already have the lungs and the legs, then you're halfway there.
It's interesting too, Kate, when you look at the level that you rose to in the sport, the differences between the top riders is so minute. I mean, it really comes down to who's having a good day, who's motivated, who got a little better food or sleep. But when you look at the D category, that's where it's wide open, or even the C's and a little bit the B's, where the differential in talent and ability and desire is, I mean, they say fitness is like a house with no windows, right? You can't look inside someone. I always use Ina Yoko Teutenberg as my example. If you met Ina in an airport, you would not think you were dealing with one of the best athletes on planet Earth. She looks like a regular person, right? But when you put her on a bike and let her do what she does, she demolished people. But wouldn't that be one of the better, don't judge a book by its cover, because you don't know what these riders have inside them. And behind every one of these avatars is somebody working incredibly hard. At this point now, most of them are in the US and Canada. I saw a couple of Mexican riders. We have a Ukraine rider, and obviously some riders out of Australia and New Zealand. But Kate, the effort that they're making is so real, it's not even funny. And let me just reference the pool of lactic acid puddling underneath them right now.
Yeah. I think what I would used to say is that the lactic acid is coming out your eyeballs, and when it leaves your legs and moves north in the body, you're in a heck of a lot of trouble.
That sounds even worse.
But, it is. But I raced a lot with Ina, and I'll tell you a story, because it goes to just how tough these athletes need to be as we flick over to the women. They're on the volcano. You can't miss the volcano. It's absolutely iconic in the Watopia world. I
want to hear your story.
5% that they're going. Well, so Ina
I'm going to hold you to it.
Yeah, we were racing in the T-Mobile team at the Giro, and we went back to get water bottles. And from the car, I was a worker. And by the time I got back to the bunch, I had no water bottles left, because I was having such a bad day that I was getting dropped trying to bring the water bottles back. And so Ina dropped back to help me. She was also having a terrible day. And as we approached the bunch, we had to make our way to the front of the bunch to give the water bottles. And she said to me, "Why don't you just attack?" And she was laughing, because clearly we were both donkeys, not racehorses on that day. And I attacked, and I got caught on the line, and Ina was the one that sprinted past me to take the stage win. So at the end of the stage, we were both laughing, because we said we were absolute donkeys. in a pack of racehorses, but mentally we just had nothing to lose because we knew that it wasn't absolutely our day. And it's always stuck with me as a memory that so much of it is mental strength. So much of it goes to your attitude and what have you got to win? What have you got to lose? And I think for all of these athletes out there, they've got absolutely nothing to lose. And I really implore them to consider that they're the one getting dropped with a water bottle, trying to bring it back to their teammates, and they've got nothing to lose by giving it a crack.
I love it, Kate. That was a highlight for the day for me, that story for sure. And I think it speaks to also you never really know what's going to happen. So just keep yourself in the mix. As they say, you're going to miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, right? So why not crank some out? Why not go for it? In order to win, you got to risk losing. If you're afraid of losing, you're never going to be a real champion. Let's pick up Culver here now because this is going to be the forward QOM that we're looking at here. This is a big one now. So let's watch again. Top 5 riders scoring points here. And Fazoli, ATP Swarm is having an outstanding day here today. And so as we jump back in with the women, 50 total K for everybody. Well, actually, let me be clear. The C's and the D's are actually racing about 35 kilometers, but here's Ange McRae. Kate, I'm going to throw it back to you because it really is starting to hot up out there now.
Well, it's about 3.7K, an average of about 3%, sorry. So you see that in some moments you think that they're off the climb. In fact, they're just dipping down. And when you look at the average, you say 3%, that's not too bad at all. But in fact, most of it's 5 or 6%. But because of these flat neutralizations,
there's a little downhill.
That kind of balances that average out.
Yeah, exactly. So that really kills that number because it's a little harder than you would think. Again, the volcano climb is what we're on right now. And then the perilous descent where a lot of things can happen. This is the select front group. Salthouse having an outstanding day today. And this is, again, the dynamic in this group is really interesting. We've whittled this down to 5 riders here, Kate. 2 riders, each have a teammate there, and then 1 individual rider. So again, Rivo scores. That's the team that of Anna Rogers, who's been so far the class of the field. But again, things can change quickly out here. As they say, it was all going great until it wasn't.
Well, this is the second to last climb. So again, the longest one. And I think if this group remains relatively intact over the top, and when I say relatively intact, I mean close enough that they can chase back on. So in a lot of the other races, we've seen it come to the finish for a sprint. I don't think this will be too dissimilar. It is a long way to the finish from the top of this. And so I don't think even Anna Rogers, she would possibly be the only one today that I would say could survive. But she actually doesn't have impetus to. I mean, she's definitely one of these top 5 that I would back in a sprint. So for her, she can take these points over the QOM perhaps and almost sit back knowing that she's got 2 other team mates there in Gillick and Moore who can do the work. And McRae and Salthouse, I mean, they can sit back and let Gillick and Moore do the work, but that doesn't really change that Rogers will be fresh for that final sprint.
Listen, I 100% agree, Kate, with your analysis. And let's be clear here. Now, the win isn't, sure, it means a lot for the ego. I've never met a bike racer that didn't enjoy the experience of winning. A legitimate win against a quality field is always going to feel great, but it only gets you 1 more point than second place, right? So you're much better off keeping your teammate in the mix rather than blowing her out. You know what I'm saying here? It's not as much. Yeah, the consistency for your team is more important than an individual result. And this is a rare moment in cycling where we really do see the team element taking an even more important role.
That's exactly right. The fact that there's little to gain because it is points over time, it certainly affects the strategy. And it really means it actually gives a lot more dominance to the Revo team, because if they have a sprinter that they can back, there's no real reason why they would have to 1, 2, 3, in fact, the other two riders. But isn't it wonderful that that's also a card that they hold? And in that regard, they're more dominant here in the esports world than they would be out on the road, because it neutralises someone like an Ange McRae taking a flyer in that final kilometre.
Yeah, this is going to be, we're going to learn a lot about the specialized tactics that you have. E-racing is different. And that's another thing that in game here, the power-ups are in play. And that's something that you'll see the experienced riders. It makes a difference if you know what you're doing with those power-ups.
Well, I would certainly be using some of these power ups. If you have a feather, that would be an amazing opportunity to use it over the KOM just to save that peak power a tiny little bit. But also, I've seen a lot of feathers used, Dave, very strategically in that final, just when they're accelerating, because if you can accelerate with a slightly lower weight, it certainly ranks those watts per kilos up.
I want to find a power up where I can give an anvil to another rider. I'm working with the engineers in Long Beach here to try to figure out how to do that, right? Can you imagine that, getting handed an anvil halfway up Alpe de Zwift?
Well, that would be a cool strategy, wouldn't it? If you could share the
Hand one anvil
power-ups
out.
between
Yeah.
the team.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's always going to be evolving is the game that is Zwift. Let's take a look at your woman here, Anna Rogers. The Canadian is riding away. Now, again, quite a ways to the finish. Well, quite a ways being 15K, but she's going to pick up first, Salthouse for second, so 4 points there for Kat. Looks like Ange McRae going to come across the line for third, so that's it. Scored our top five. No more points left for our Preems or Queen of the Mountains out there, Kate. It's all down to natural racing to the finish line now.
Well, and again, Rogers, what a dominant performance. I mean, we've discussed not using too much energy, that you only need to win by a little bit, but I actually think that her legs are so good today that when she accelerates, she doesn't even necessarily mean to open that massive gap, because she's very clearly not continuing with it. So she's not putting out 4 to 5 watts per kilo over the top in order to keep that break going. But it's allowing her to take a bit of a breather, have a little bit of a break, and certainly get that aerobic advantage over the other riders, if not any time.
Okay, well, we do have two races going on concurrently here, and it sounds like the men are getting close to starting the KOM climb, and here we go. Jumping in with the front group. I call this the Vanguard. Nice to see Ramirez from Costa Rica. And that, again, we are starting to see, Kate, here more and more riders from Central and South America jumping in the mix. Argentina has been a country of note lately here. So really, really excited to see the globalization that Zwift brings. On some days at WTRL on Thursdays, Kate, we'll have over 90 countries competing. And that always makes me feel really proud. I don't know why I'm proud.
I agree. I'm proud for the sport, you know. I think the sport has come an awful long way, where it was a bit of a privileged sport, and we saw a lot of the countries not having equal access to it. And I think that is this is a massive game changer in that regard, not only for equality across different nations, but also across the sexes. This is certainly the first broadcast where you can commentate on the men and the women simultaneously, which is awesome. And the strategies deployed in the Zwift world for both the men and the women's racing is actually fairly similar. And I love that. I think that all of the athletes would be watching each other and watching the men's racing, watching the women's racing, and seeing what they can learn.
You know what, Kate, I absolutely love it. That it makes, at Zwift, no one would complain that you're talking about the women's race while the men's race is on screen. In real life, they would. And this is where I'm going to just unabashed say that Zwift has done more for women's racing than any other individual company. There have been some big helpers out there along the way, but the respect and the way that they've elevated the platform for the women. Let's reference the Tour de France virtual this summer. The women finally got the same treatment as the men. It was about time. We waited way too long for that, and I'm awfully proud that Zwift is a company that took that seriously and went to bat for women's racing. You'd be surprised sometimes at where the pushback comes from.
I agree with that. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to equal that out without any complaints. And, well, you know how I feel, Dave. Anybody who complains, well, they can disconnect their internet for all I care. But they're doing an excellent job at Zwift to make everybody very equal. I love that it looks like there's some ghost riders here as we're watching Kellison, because
It's a cool
I think
feature.
that is...
Yeah.
It is. It's almost a perfect visual representation of what it feels like to be in a Zwift peloton. You don't have anybody breathing over your shoulder like you do in the real world. You don't have that all surrounding you, but you are so immersed in this screen and all of the data that's being thrown at you. But can we just say what an awesome job these guys are doing as a bunch? It's still a pretty big bunch together, but there has been some really aggressive moves off the front. There must have been some solid chasing back and some really good work amongst the teams in order to bring that back as well. But certainly as they approach that KOM again, it's a 3.7 kilometre climb, averaging about 5 or 6% when they're actually climbing, but with some flat and downhill bits. And we've got Kieran Lewis from Zwift HQ, who has been doing an incredible job today. We know he's in good form. And after the Aussie winter stuck inside, I mean, I think COVID stuck everybody inside, but certainly Kieran has been doing a super duper job. And as they come towards this KOM, it will break up a bit, but I'm not sure, Dave, that given the size of the bunch, I'm not sure it will break up enough to really whittle it down to a small front group.
Zwift absolutely saved my mental health during the last 7 months. Not just the commentating, but riding on Zwift itself has been absolutely a godsend. And I will have to say, Kate, of all of the races that I have seen today, and it feels like about 30, that this is by far the biggest group that we've seen together at this point. They're down to about 15K. Actually, if you want to tap on the odometer, like when you're running out of gas there, it's really more like 51-ish K of racing out here, but the proof is in the pudding always. We're going to find out who has the good legs out here, as Mukapadaya of the Penn Velo team is the rider that we're looking at right now, just fighting his way back into the group. And that right there illustrates what Kate has been talking about. These riders have been really showing quality of character out here today. So we're moving into the finale zone here, Kate, just about ready to put paid to what has been an incredible second day of racing when you talk about the Zwift Racing League. But this is our first ever community day. And Kate, I'm going to tell you before it gets crazy out here, what an honor and a privilege it has been working with you tonight, or today, I should say. It's already tomorrow.
I appreciate that, Dave. It is. It's already Wednesday here in Australia. And Dave, I love working with you because the last time I heard your voice, you were commentating on some races that I was in. So what a delightful change in circumstances to be working alongside you, and who would have thought in the virtual world. But look at Kieran Lewis
Kieran,
really
your man.
sticking it to them. But
yeah,
but Ivany, Finesse Wahoo is certainly one of the biggest teams out there, but Zwift HQ certainly follows behind. And Penn Velo, we saw a rider from there earlier. So Kieran Lewis, I think he just got Ivany on the line there, which is a bit of a sneaky point taker. But I tell you what, Kieran Lewis is pretty handy in a sprint too, so he might pick up some points at the finish there.
Take a look at the replay here as Ivany. Finesse Wahoo has had an incredible day. They've raced in multiple different regions, and your man Kieran there getting second across the line. These points scoring feel like a broken record at this point today. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for the final KOM. All right. So this is always great. And I do appreciate Nathan's hard work. Nathan, I think, has been up for 24 hours producing races out here and giving us a look at that final KOM for the men. So, all right, they'll be bracing themselves for the run into the finish line. As we've talked about, the descents are no joke, but I think it's time to take a look at what's happening here. Again, we're going to move around from some different groups still here with the A men.
Well, so there's less than 15 kilometres left to race. So it is a big group, and there is nothing that if that volcano climb and the Watopia climb, which is a lot steeper, averaging it was only 1 kilometre that forward climb, but over 6% average. And if the 3.7k of the volcano wasn't enough to rip that bunch apart, then I certainly can't see anything between now and the finish that will do so. And that's when the strategy comes into play, because they'll all have to figure out how to get into that final. As we flip across back to the women, interesting situation. We've still got that 5 in the front, but it looks like Fasoli is trying to bridge across. She's certainly one of the pre-race favourites. And last time we saw her, she was about 26 seconds off the back. So this is an incredible fight back.
This is
close.
What
a solid effort from her.
Holy cow, Kate. She just might do it. As a matter of fact, she's got the momentum. So we're looking at Salthouse right now. But if you look behind Salthouse, you're going to see Fasoli just a couple seconds back. This is really impressive. This is I'm not going to say 1 in a million kind of ride, but it's a 1 in 1,000 kind of ride to be able to do this. And it looks like, again, so Salthouse is just coming out of that front group. Fasoli will certainly love to get a couple seconds of gap, but really you're looking at 2 riders that are trending in different directions as Fasoli is coming good. Salthouse remotivating now, though, as well. Boy, it's the mentality of the racer is, I love that book by Crab, the Danish book that talks about just what goes through your head at this point in a bike race is really quite amazing, as every electron is being stimulated up there. Trying to stay calm is really challenging to do, and that's why we have an expert like Kate along with us, because Kate, this is something we've seen a few times today, but let's talk about it. If Fasoli does make the catch, is she going to be completely gassed? Is there any chance she can win this race? I know there's questions that are maybe unanswerable, but let's talk about that perspective. Is there any way that she can catch this group and win?
Well, look, on paper, Fasoli is certainly one of the favourites. She's got one of the higher 20-minute average powers at 282 watts. That's seriously impressive from her. She's also got a pretty good sprint on her, and her 15-second average power is over 7 watts per kilo. Physiologically, Fasoli is more than capable of sprinting for a top 2. The only person on paper that I would rate higher is Anna Rogers, and that was before I saw how much form she was in. I think realistically, she's trying to work back there with Salthouse, but as you mentioned, they're on quite opposite trajectories. For Salthouse to even have gotten dropped, we can probably assume that she's done a bit of work up the front for Rogers. But the other thing that means we can assume is that she's not going to do a whole lot of work to help Fasoli get over. And I hope that Fasoli is not relying on that, but possibly she's just jumping there to take a small break, recompose herself, and then jump across to that front group. But they are running out of kilometres. There's only 6.3 kilometres left in the race, and that's under 10 minutes. That's not a lot of time to recoup aerobically or anaerobically. Honestly, my assessment, I don't think that if Fasoli makes it across, she will be a danger to Rogers at all, but she certainly could sneak onto the podium.
You know, I have to sign off on that, Kate. But again, I love the spirit. Heart is a big part of this sport, that's for sure. Looking at Ange McRae right now, another one of the racers that comes in with a really good reputation. Revo Scores is riding one of, I certainly say, a noteworthy race. We are really looking forward, and I'm sure that you've been asked to contribute with OJ Borg and the Zwift Insider Show coming up on Fridays, and certainly the riders that we've got on screen right now. Anna Rogers stands out, Kate, some of the noteworthy rides from today. And we're not done yet. They're moving into the grand finale.
Well, the Zwift show will certainly allow us to get to know some of the personalities behind the avatars. And again, that's one thing that we don't see here, which is an absolute advantage to the riders, is we can't see facial expressions and we can't see how much they're all suffering. I think that's awesome. You know, I think that it stops any red herrings being thrown out or anybody pulling a terrible pain face when in fact they're cruising quite a lot. I think it makes it a little bit more honest here. It is purely just about numbers, and it is absolutely about how tough you are and how hard you can fight. And speaking of which, Fasoli, who arguably has had one of the better performances today by almost bridging across, she's starting to lose a little bit of time. So she's been working pretty hard, but I think it has cost her.
They're still going to hold on to Kate. Let's see if I've got my math right, but I think this is 5th and 6th on course right now. So those are major points that the team will be able to collect. So the damage is not that bad, all in all. That's a really good look at what that gap looks like. That's 5 seconds on Watopia. And it's one of those things, until you've tried to do it yourself, tried to close down a gap on a hard-working front group, you just don't realize how hard it is to drive that nail home. Although they're starting to get closer and closer, it's down to 3 seconds. So all of that being said, we have another moment where this race will elevate, where it will go ballistic. If these two can do better than 5th and 6th, we should really remember what Salthouse and Fasoli went through here. So I'm going to kind of put a pin in this, Kate, and remember how hard they worked, and let's see if they pick up any points for keeping their head in the game. It certainly doesn't hurt. It's a good practice. I think a lot of pro cycling is developing excellent habits. If you want to be outstanding, do it all the time.
Well, I think a little extra gold star to Fasoli, who looks like she's been doing the lion's share of the work dragging this back. Her watts per kilo are certainly up significantly from the front bunch. Those front 4 riders, they're soft pedaling a little bit. They know that they're within the final 5 kilometres of the race. There's no more massive challenges. There is a bit of a pinch up through Reverse Titans Grove at the finish, but if it hasn't really broken them up so far in the race, then I can't foresee that happening either. Them laying back a little bit has certainly given Fasoli and Salthouse the ability to chase back on. A group of 4 is rather different to a group of 6. I would still say Anna Rogers has the advantage at this stage, but it certainly equalises it a bit.
I tell you what, if you were laying odds, is there a gambling capital in Australia? I've never heard that, but Brisbane, Vegas, maybe. But if you were laying odds here now, you would have really started changing them when you talk about Fasoli, because they're going to make contact here. They're going to get in here, and maybe Kate have long enough to take a couple deep breaths before we throw down the gauntlet for the final time here. This is exceptional riding. This is a noteworthy performance out here today, and you know what? The odds of Fasoli winning this race 10 minutes ago were 1 in 100. They're more like 1 in 10 now.
Well, and I think, again, at the beginning, Fasoli looked so good on paper, and it was a bit surprising to see her not there. We have to consider what that reason was. Was she not there when this break formed because she had a bad wheel, because she had maybe a slight moment of hesitation? A power drop, but it may have even been that she chose to take a drink at a really inopportune time. There's small things that can happen that can make a massive impact. I think her bridging across like she has shows that she has the legs. Now, she may be a little bit fried today, but I certainly think that moving forward and looking at the racing coming up, that she should have a very firm highlighter scribble over her name as one to watch, because I tend to think, based on this, Dave, that she's had a bit of a brain fart with tactics, and she won't make that mistake again.
Well, she showed a lot of strength, agreeing completely with you, Kate. She's shown a lot of strength there. If she does win this race, she's going to collapse like an Olympic cross-country skier when she comes across the line, because that's one of the beautiful things here. There is no tomorrow when you talk about this series. It's 1 week later. So, Kate, there's a big difference in a stage race when you have to race day after day versus being able to completely empty the tank out here today. And, man, I tell you what, Fasoli now becomes one of the 3 riders that I'm really going to laser etch into my mind as a rider with tremendous heart. Let's take a look at our front group here as Ange McRae, unfortunately, getting unhinged. And you can see what she's up against now. Yeah. It happens.
It's a shame for Anne. She's been so consistent, but she is one of the lighter weight riders that is much more suited to the climbs. It does not surprise me at all that she was so well positioned over those climbs. But But conversely, it probably doesn't surprise me all that much that she might struggle through these higher power, flatter areas where the weight is an advantage rather than a disadvantage as it is up the climbs. Again, if we go back to talk about the overall point skew system, if Ange McRae finishes in 6th place, she picked up a lot of points in those intermediate climbs and those KOMs. So she still will finish in 6th position, which overall is a pretty solid position. So the next group back to 7th is almost 3 minutes down. At this point, the worst she can really do, because delightfully we don't have mechanicals or falls, is 6th position. So if I were her, I would be saying, gee, I've done really well today. Let's solidify this position and let's come back next week and consider what I can do to make sure that I can continue those points.
And Kate, to be honest, like you said, with 2 minutes and 56 seconds, let's just round that up to 3 minutes. She has time to stop, make a Vegemite sandwich, eat it, and get back on the bike and finish and still get the same points. So 3 minutes on Zwift is quite a while.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so you know, Dave, everybody, every Australian cyclist out there is likely already fueled on a Vegemite sandwich ahead of today. So Andrew McRae certainly flying the flag for the Aussies.
No doubt about it. I think the Canadian equivalent of that would be a good slug of maple syrup right now, as Anna Rogers, the Riva Scores rider, has been phenomenal, picking up a lot of Queen of the Mountain points. And here we go, Kate. Let's buckle up, because we've got right around 2 kilometers of racing until this one is done and dusted. We've got 2 riders going clear, and one of them is Barbara Fazoli. The other is Anna Rogers. This is like watching the resurrection of a racer here. You thought they had her down and out. Well, they didn't shut the door. She showed back up. She didn't knock. She kicked it in. Holy cow. Fazoli and Rogers. It's a 2-rider drag race at this point, Kate.
Fazoli is seriously experienced on Zwift. She has a lot of rides under her belt, and she really knows, she'll know this course very well and know how it finishes and know how to play it. Anna Rogers, she's almost got nothing to lose, because even if she finishes in 2nd, she'll certainly take the overall honours in terms of points, because she's been so dominant in those QOMs. But I got to say, I think ego comes into this a little bit. There's certainly no chance Rogers will be sitting back and letting Fazoli take the lead here. Coming into this race, these were the 2 hot favourites, and they have certainly come to the fore in this final kilometre.
I have to be honest here. So Nathan and I have called quite a few races today. We have not seen anything like this, and Nathan is losing his mind. It's probably taking everything he has to not turn on the mic and just jump in, because this is absolutely bananas, folks. This is what the Zwift Racing League is all about. Amazing scenarios. These human beings are the best at putting on a show. So, Kate, here we go. This is like watching Godzilla and Mothra battling in Manhattan, man. It is just fire, smoke. These 2 riders are absolutely going to go deeper than anybody else I think we have seen today. It's Canadian on Canadian right now. So Fazoli, who was dropped, Kate, if you had to guess, she was more than 20 seconds back at one point. She even maybe 30 seconds back.
Well, it looks like there's a bit of cat and mouse going on here, to be honest. I almost feel like Rogers might be giving a little bit of distance to take a jump, because Rogers so far has been exceptionally dominant. And I've got to say, when it comes down to the 15-second averages, Rogers sneaks just above Fazoli in that department. But this is interesting. We can't really tell
give her 3 seconds.
Whether this gap is an attack or what is going on. But Fazoli, the ride of the day, what an incredible acceleration she has had. 168 heart rate. Dave, she is absolutely not at max. She is pushing it, but she's got more in the tank.
She's breathing through her nose right now, Kate. This will go down as the command performance of the day. I think that, as they say, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was when he convinced us he wasn't real. Well, Fazoli coming out of this group, no one gave her, well, I shouldn't say no one gave her a chance. That's not fair at all. But I don't think that many people saw this scenario. This was your never say die moment. Absolutely stunning. The gap has gone up to 7 seconds. I think Anna Rogers has let this one slip between her fingers. And you know what, Kate? all things being said, Anna Rogers collected a ton of points, but that's your champion. This was a ride I'm not going to forget. Fazoli for the win. Rogers will take silver. Every point matters. Again, starting with 30 points for the winner, down to 1 point for 30th. So that was 29 points. Salthouse will pick up 28 points. We'll see more. McRae, Connolly, Aldridge, Litton. These are the next riders we should. And boy, I tell you what, Kate, after an incredible race here for the women, it looks like they're going to be coming through one at a time, basically. It was a rough day of racing.
Well, and good on them for making it so aggressive, even though they could have let it come to the finish in a bit of a bunch and have a bit of a sprint. It is a bit of an uphill finish, but these ladies have absolutely put everything on the line. Seriously impressive. We've had a couple of riders who we knew would be successful. But can I just say, Fazoli, my goodness me, what an incredible ride. And just goes to show, I'd love to see what happened there, where she lost a bit of attention to get dropped and had to chase back. But we fly back to the men. Isn't this a different scenario? We've got quite a large bunch here, about 20 coming into the finish. But again, it is an uphill kick. It's just shy of a kilometre at around 4%, doing the reverse Titans Grove. A lot of these riders will know it exceptionally well. There's my boy Kieran Lewis. He's right up there. And Dave, I've got to say that he has looked very good throughout this whole ride. And I think that he's certainly slated to do well in this final K.
Hey, I'm not calling Kieran a horse, but isn't this sport so much more fun, Kate, when you have a horse in the race, as they say? I really genuinely think that if you are someone who's just joining us, go ahead and pick out a rider. Go on Zwift Power, learn about them, and then you can watch them rise up through the ranks. And just, it's really fun to invest in these individuals, because behind every one of these avatars is a hard-working bike racer out there somewhere. So, Kate, are you ready? Can you do it again? Because here we go. It's a double dip, because we got the men coming in hot. They're just about to hit 50K. It goes up and down a little bit. It's a complicated finale. Kate, here we go. One more time. Let's bring it home.
It is certainly a big bunch, but these riders are going to have to punch well into the 7-8 watts per kilo to get across this line. And the riders, well, geez, they've had a hard day out on course. But Kieran Lewis has been prominent so far. There's a bunch of about 20 riders. He's up there now.
Well, he's well positioned here.
Is one of the major teams. Penvelo as well. Finesse, another one of the teams. They've been working very well together out on course. It all comes to this lead-in, but it is slightly uphill, Dave. So the lead-in doesn't mean a lot. What means a lot more is what's left in the tank after 50 hard kilometres of racing.
And you really, Kate, hate to expose yourself. Obviously, Kieran Lewis there throwing down his power up, going to use that feather. Let's see. Well, look at that surge coming here from Kieran Lewis. He's going to make a run at it. He's gone early. He's gone with authority, and Kieran Lewis has hit out for the finish line. Paul, Ivany, his arch nemesis are coming for him. They're going to run out of real estate pretty quickly. You can just see the finish line up the road. They're charging now. What a finale we're witnessing. This is going to wrap up an incredible day of community racing. It's going to be, let's see, Siarka, the Polish rider. He's bearing down. Is it going to be enough? Lewis with a little bit more. Lewis is going to do it. It looks like the Zwift HQ Rocket Rider gets it. That is amazing, Kieran Lewis. You are my hero.
What a ride from the Aussie. I think that was incredibly impressive, because Siaka, my goodness me, he was coming. He was pumping out more than 10 watts per kilo, chasing Lewis. But that gap that Lewis opened up, it was just unobtainable to bridge that gap. But what an effort that Siaka made. That was a seriously impressive, albeit uphill sprint. Seriously impressive. And here's the men's B. They are coming in to that final. We've already seen, Dave, 2 pretty hardcore sprints where big gaps have opened up, but they have needed big watt bombs in order to do it. The B-grade men will be no different. There's a group of nearly 20, but all 20 will not be considered equal as they come into that final sprint.
Kate, thank you. We're going back now and taking a look at the final KOM for the B men. So this is a replay of that KOM a moment ago. So it'll give us a good feel, Kate, for who's been animating this race, who's up in the mix. Although, as you mentioned, I think 20 was a pretty good estimate at the number of riders up in this group, and I'm going to imagine it comes back together here. But we'll jump forward quite a bit actually after we watch that replay. And we'll have a chance, and you can go to WTRL. Always remember that's the World Tactical Racing League .racing to look at results. But okay, picking up the live action front group here, and this will be the final time today that we get a look at the finish line at Titans Grove Reverse. Okay, here we go.
We're watching B Randon here. The heart rate's still pretty conservative. 158, you should be able to hold a conversation at that rate. The sprint has certainly not started yet. There's a little bit of tactics going into play here, a little bit of bunching, or as we like to call it in the Zwift world, a little bit of blobbing in the bunch. It is much better to see it's strung out at this point if you want to keep the pace high. And even though it's an uphill sprint, as we saw with Kieran Lewis, he dropped that featherweight, which allowed him to accelerate and open that gap. A lot of strategy goes into this, but Brandon seems to be Randon. Aren't these great names? There's some fabulous names in Zwift. And you can call yourself whatever you like. Well, I'm sure we'll see some Hulks out there. He is sitting pretty. He is under 160 beats per minute. The normal average max would be around the 175 to 190 beats mark. So this indicates that he's still got a little bit of fuel left in the tank. There's about 15 riders there. As they come into the finish, they wouldn't have seen what happened in the women's or in the men's, and they won't quite know the flavour of the finish in a bunch, but they will have certainly had time to recon the course and know what this finish looks like. 900 metres up in the final kilometre. It's tough going, but still one for the strong men, the high watts per kilo. We'll certainly see when they open up that.
Yeah, it is really enjoyable to bring this one home now at this point. It has been an absolutely incredible day of racing. So thank you to everybody who's part of our Zwift community. We get one final look on our first ever community day of racing for the Zwift Racing League. And again, over 5,250 racers taking part throughout the day. This is the last group that has a chance for a win here, Kate, and they've got less than a kilometer before this one is put paid. I can't wait for this one to be done and dusted. This might be the largest group I've seen together at this point, Kate, and here we go. Let the hostilities begin. We're going to start dropping some power-ups here. As a matter of fact, they're dropping them all over the shop right now.
It is the featherweight again that allows that acceleration at that maximum, because at that point of acceleration, when you're a little bit lighter, it allows you to open that gap. And Mix has certainly strategically knocked that one out of the park. Jensen, he is in hot pursuit. They are all at very high watts, but still leaving a little bit in the tank, not near the 10 mark yet, more around the 8.5 to the 6 or the 7. But Mix is opening up a big lead here, Dave. He is looking smooth.
Yeah, I mean, it's not over yet, but I got to say, he's actually going to do it. I am stunned. About 10 seconds ago, I thought we were looking at the first foray, but he's going to have to stay on the gas. This is where it gets really, really hard. No doubt about it. This is where you separate the wheat from the chaff. That's going to be the finish line, and I think they gave him too much leash here. It looks like Mix is going to do it, Kate. Top 30 spots matter, but nothing sweeter than winning out of a strong, strong field. Victories are judged by the quality of competition. This one is a world-class win, and Mix is going to do it for Audi B. That's done and dusted. Your gold standard is Mix, and we'll start scoring them now, Kate.
A brilliant ride from Mix, and what a sprint, what a strategic win with that drop of the feather power weight, and then he physically backed it up. What can I say? He rode away, and I tell you what, that big bunch with a kilometre to go is in absolute pieces. They did not have anything to answer for. Mix, he can walk away feeling very confident and very chuffed with himself. What an excellent ride.
Yeah, that's when you talk about confidence building in this sport. I think we're going to go back and take a look at. Actually, you know what? I think we might be ready to say thank you to everybody. I'll start with you, Kate. It was a fantastic day. Kieran Lewis getting the win as you take a look at the Australian flag. As Mateusz Siarka, boy, he made a run at it. Got to give the Polish rider credit. Lawrence Monks ends up in third. Again, this is the America West region that we're talking about, the final region of racing here today. Nick Paul for fourth. Philippe Nystrom will take fifth. Jono Lafleur taking sixth. It's going to be Stephen Wu. I love the Penn Velo guys. And Stephen Wu in seventh. RC Ivany, big part of the conversation tonight. The Canadian in eighth. And then you have Eugene Chan in ninth and Sean Jefferson rounding out our top 10. That's for America's West men, the A's. The B's, they're still tabulating. We'll get a look at the America's West women A's here. What a ride. That was the stunner of the day. I'll let OJ Borg know. That's for sure. As Fazoli for the win. Barbara Fazoli, Anna Rogers second. It's all Canada for your top three, with Jana Gillick taking third in the bronze medal. It's Kat Salthouse, the American, in fourth. And then another Canadian, four in the top five, is Tracy Moore. Sixth place going to Angela McRae. Seventh is Joy Connolly. Morgan Aldridge in eighth. Christine Culver running for Colavita NorCal in ninth. And then it's Brittany Litton rounding out our top 10 out of New Zealand. Well, that's our women's A's. Again, you can go to WTRL.racing to find out a lot more information if you really want to dig in on this. Kate Bates, what a pleasure. I think we were really lucky to have such a fun race to commentate on our first time together. But I tell you what, I'll commentate with you anytime, my friend.
Well, I love it. I love it. I love it. These riders were just absolutely incredible. And, you know, we can talk until the cows come home about how cool Zwift racing is, but it takes the athletes to make it exciting. And boy, didn't they. We had three races that we saw, the women's A, the men's A, and the men's B. They all had quite vastly different results. But I'm going to put it out there for anybody watching who might be thinking of racing. One, do it. Two, if you get that feather up, the best use I have seen all day by both Fazoli in the women and Lewis in the men was to drop it mid-sprint when you're accelerating. That seemed to make a really big difference, and I am super impressed to see the strategy playing out. I think a lot back to the drawing board, or the butcher's paper, as it may be, the virtual butcher's paper, as it may be, and to see what happens in the coming week. So next week, Dave, we've got the team's time trial. Oh my goodness, that is just a strategic mind blow altogether, that one. And then we've got the points or the scratch race the week after. So we go week on, week off with that. So we've got 5 of this format, 5 of the team's time trial. What a way to kick it off.
I'm going to add a pro tip from Kate every week then. And I would agree with you. Using that feather power up early and believing in yourself that you can back it up with some strong legs in that last 10 seconds, that's the way to do it, no doubt. So, Kate, I want to make a special thank you to Nathan Guerra for his hard work producing the show today. It's been a really crazy run up to getting the Premier League launched yesterday, and then today's community racing going around the globe. Our friends at WTRL, along with everybody at Zwift. I tell you what, today was one that we won't soon forget. So for my colleague, Kate Bates, and Nathan Guerra, the whole crew at WTRL and Zwift, I'm Dave Towle saying thanks a lot. Ride on. We'll see you next week.